In this world, who would want you? She would hiss whenever I dared to stand up for myself. The words always cut deeper than any knife could. Those 15 years felt like serving time in an emotional prison, with her as both my jailer and my judge. Her morning routine included reminding me of my worthlessness before I even had my first sip of coffee. The tactic was calculated, making sure I knew that without her, I would be utterly alone in this world. She wielded my lack of family like a weapon, knowing full well that my parents had passed away when I was young and that I had no siblings to turn to. By evening, her favorite pastime became listing all the ways I had disappointed her that day. My depression became her favorite tool against me. "Who else would put up with your moods?" she would ask with disgust in her voice whenever I couldn't get out of bed. The chronic back pain that plagued me after an accident became another chain she used to bind me to her. "You think anyone would want to take care of an invalid like you?" The worst part wasn't the screaming or the constant belittling. It was the look of utter contempt that crossed her face whenever I entered a room. I still remember when things were different, when her eyes would light up at the sight of me. That woman disappeared so gradually I barely noticed until she was completely gone. One night, after a particularly vicious verbal assault about how I couldn't even hold a proper conversation at her work dinner, I finally asked what had happened to the woman I fell in love with. Her response changed everything. She laughed. Not just any laugh, but a cold, calculated sound that held not a trace of humor. "That woman was stupid enough to think you had potential," she said, sipping her wine casually as if discussing the weather. "I've since learned better." That moment crystallized 15 years of abuse into perfect clarity. I realized then that nothing would ever change as long as I remained under the same roof with her. What she didn't know was that something had already begun to shift inside me months earlier. The company I worked for had started doing better, and I'd been quietly saving money in an account she knew nothing about. While she thought I was working late, I had started seeing a therapist who helped me recognize the patterns of emotional abuse that had become my normal. The medication I'd started taking for my depression was working, clearing the mental fog that had kept me trapped for so long. That night, after her cruel confession, I lay awake beside her sleeping form and made a decision. I would not confront her. I would not beg for things to change. Instead, I would work silently and methodically to build myself an escape route. She was right about one thing. I had no family to turn to. But what she failed to realize was that I didn't need family to leave her. I just needed courage and a plan. The next morning, I woke up early and went through the motions of our usual routine. I accepted her daily reminder of my supposed worthlessness with a new sense of detachment. As I drove to work, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. She thought she had me trapped forever, believing her own lie that I had nobody else. What she failed to understand was that having nobody else was far better than having someone who deliberately destroyed my soul piece by piece every day. She had no idea that with each cruel word, each dismissive gesture, she was actually loosening her hold on me rather than tightening it. Each reminder that I had nobody else only strengthened my resolve to prove her wrong. I would rebuild my life one careful step at a time, and when I finally walked away, she would be the one left facing the truth about who truly had nobody. The first step in my escape plan was financial independence. For years, she controlled every cent that came into our home. She doled out an allowance to me like I was a child, demanding receipts for every purchase. My salary went directly into our joint account, which she monitored obsessively. Any unexplained expense would trigger an interrogation that could last for hours. I needed to break this financial chain first. I approached my boss and requested that 20% of my paycheck be diverted to a new account at a different bank. I explained that I needed to build some savings for future medical expenses. He agreed without question. Perhaps he had noticed the signs of my deteriorating home life that I tried so hard to conceal. Within 6 months, I had amassed enough to sustain myself for at least 3 months if necessary. It wasn't much, but it was a start. During this time, her behavior worsened. It was as if she could sense something changing, though she couldn't identify what. The verbal assaults intensified. "Look at you, pathetic as always," she spat one evening when I declined to attend yet another of her work functions where she would parade me around like a prop, only to criticize my social awkwardness afterward. "You should be grateful I even bother taking you anywhere. Not like anyone else would want to be seen with you." I'd heard these words 1,000 times before, but something was different now. The words hit me, but they didn't penetrate as deeply. I had begun building an invisible shield around myself with each dollar saved, each private therapy session, each small step toward freedom. When she screamed that I was nothing without her, I simply nodded and retreated to my home office, which had become my sanctuary and planning center. My therapist had suggested documenting the abuse, so I started keeping a journal hidden in my work bag. I recorded dates, times, exact phrases, and how they made me feel. At first, writing down her words felt like experiencing the abuse twice. But over time, seeing the patterns on paper helped me understand that this wasn't about my failings. It was about her need for control. The journal became evidence that I wasn't crazy or oversensitive, as she often claimed. The next phase of my plan involved rebuilding a social network. This was perhaps the most challenging part. Years of isolation had left me socially awkward and distrustful. She had systematically driven away the few friends I had after we married, creating drama and conflicts until they eventually stopped calling. CO workers kept their distance, having witnessed her embarrassing outbursts at company events. I began with small steps, a brief conversation with a colleague in the break room, accepting an invitation to lunch instead of eating alone at my desk, joining the company's weekly pickup basketball game despite my limited athletic ability. The first few attempts were painful and awkward, but gradually connections formed. Not deep friendships yet, but human connections that reminded me I could exist in the world as something other than her emotional punching bag. She noticed these changes and escalated her tactics. When I mentioned casually that I had lunch with CO workers, she immediately questioned who was there, focusing particularly on whether any women had joined. Her jealousy, once flattering in the early days, had morphed into another control mechanism. "You think any woman would look twice at you?" She laughed cruelly. "They're probably just feeling sorry for you." I weathered these storms with a new strength. Each insult now came with an expiration date. Each attempt to diminish me only reinforced my determination to leave. On particularly bad nights, I would lock myself in the bathroom and silently recite my new mantra: 6 more months, 5 more months, 4 more months. The countdown kept me sane. My health began improving as well. The chronic pain in my back didn't disappear, but it became more manageable as my mental state improved. I found a doctor who actually listened instead of just prescribing painkillers. Physical therapy sessions were carefully scheduled during lunch breaks, so she wouldn't know. Each small improvement in my physical condition was another link in her chain of control broken. One evening, she called from work to say she would be home late again. This had become increasingly common, and I suspected she was having an affair. Strangely, the thought didn't hurt as it once might have. Instead, it gave me extra hours of peace in the house and time to research apartments in a neighboring city, about an hour's drive from our home. Far enough for a fresh start, but close enough to keep my job. That night, I found the perfect place, a small one-bedroom apartment in a secure building with reasonable rent that fit within my budget. I submitted an application online using my work email. 3 days later, I received approval. I signed the lease electronically and arranged to pick up the keys in 2 weeks. The timeline suddenly became real. After 15 years of emotional imprisonment, freedom had an actual date on the calendar. That night, when she came home and immediately began criticizing the state of the kitchen, I felt an unfamiliar sensation spreading through my chest. It took me a moment to recognize it as power, not power over her, but power over my own life and future. She had no idea that with every cruel word, she was speaking to a man who would soon be gone. With financial preparations underway and an apartment secured, I turned my attention to building a life that could sustain me emotionally after leaving. My therapist explained that abusers typically work to cut their victims off from support networks. Hearing my situation described in clinical terms helped me understand that what I was experiencing wasn't unique or my fault. It was a recognizable pattern of control and manipulation. "You're developing healthy boundaries," my therapist told me during one session. That's why her tactics seem less effective now. Those words stayed with me, giving me strength during particularly difficult evenings at home. When she mocked my appearance or intelligence, I would mentally repeat, "These are just tactics. This isn't the truth about me." At work, my cautious social efforts began yielding results. A CO worker invited me to join a weekend hiking group. My first instinct was to decline. For years, any invitation had been met with her immediate disapproval or suspicious questioning. But now I simply didn't tell her. I claimed I needed to go into the office to catch up on a project and went hiking instead. The experience was transformative. 6 people, all strangers to me, welcomed me without judgment. We hiked for 3 hours, talking about everything from movies to career goals. Nobody criticized how I spoke or mocked my opinions. Nobody kept score of my social failings. By the end of the hike, I had exchanged phone numbers with 2 of them and made plans to join again the following weekend. When I returned home that evening, she immediately launched into her usual interrogation about where I'd been and why the project was taking so long. I gave vague answers, something I'd never dared to do before. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion, but for once, I didn't crumble under her gaze. The memory of the mountain view and easy conversation with new acquaintances formed a protective barrier around me. "You're hiding something," she accused, stepping closer until she was inches from my face. In the past, this proximity would have made me stammer and confess everything. This time, I simply shrugged and walked to the kitchen to get water. Her expression of shock at my non-reaction almost made me laugh. The hiking group became my Saturday sanctuary. Each week brought new trails, new conversations, and new strength. I began bringing subtle changes into other aspects of my life as well. I bought new clothes during lunch breaks, keeping them in my car, and changing before work. Nothing flashy, just items that made me feel more confident. She noticed eventually, making cutting remarks about me trying to impress someone at work, but the comments lacked their former power to humiliate me. My physical health continued improving. Regular hiking strengthened my back muscles, reducing the chronic pain that had plagued me for years. I began sleeping better despite the tension at home. My depression medication was working, lifting the mental fog that had kept me trapped in her reality for so long. Small decisions became easier to make without the paralyzing self-doubt she had instilled in me. She sensed these changes and escalated her efforts to maintain control. One evening, she accidentally spilled wine on my phone. Another day, she called my office repeatedly, claiming a family emergency, only to demand I come home immediately to help with a minor household issue. When these tactics didn't work, she tried fake kindness, suggesting a vacation together, speaking nostalgically about our early days, even initiating physical intimacy after months of rejection. The sudden shift was jarring but transparent. My therapist had warned me about this cycle, abuse followed by a honeymoon phase to reel the victim back in. Instead of feeling confused, I felt validated. Her behavior was following the exact pattern described in the books and articles I'd been reading about emotional abuse. During this time, I quietly continued my preparations. I updated my resume and LinkedIn profile, not because I planned to leave my job, but to ensure I had options if needed. I gathered important documents, birth certificate, social security card, insurance information, and scanned them, storing digital copies in a secure cloud account. I began taking personally meaningful items to my office a few at a time: photographs, a watch from my grandfather, books I couldn't bear to leave behind. The most challenging part was maintaining the facade at home. Each morning brought the same routine of emotional landmines. Each evening required careful navigation of her moods and triggers. The difference was that now I recognized them as tactics rather than truths. 2 months before my planned departure date, she found my therapy appointment card in my wallet. The explosion was nuclear. She accused me of betraying her, of airing our private business to strangers, of wasting money that should be going toward our future. She demanded the therapist's name and number, threatening to call and set them straight about who I really was. In that moment, standing in our kitchen with her screaming inches from my face, something crystallized within me. This woman who had promised to love and cherish me was enraged that I was seeking help for my mental health. She wasn't concerned about my well-being. She was concerned about losing control over my perceptions and decisions. "No," I said quietly. Just that one word. She stopped mid-sentence, shock registering on her face. In 15 years, I had never flatly refused her anything. "What did you just say to me?" she demanded, voice dangerously low. "No," I repeated, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "My therapy is private. You can't call my therapist." What followed was the worst verbal assault of our marriage. She brought up every failing, every weakness, every vulnerability I had ever shown. She threatened to leave, to throw me out, to tell everyone we knew what a terrible husband I was. But beneath the fear her tirade induced, I felt something else, a profound sadness for the broken person raging before me, and an even deeper certainty that I was making the right decision by leaving. The confrontation over my therapy sessions marked a turning point. In its aftermath, she attempted to re-establish control through alternating tactics, sometimes unexpected kindness, other times even more vicious verbal attacks. I weathered these storms with a growing sense of detachment, knowing each day brought me closer to freedom. The apartment lease had been signed. The first month's rent and security deposit paid from my secret account. The countdown clock in my mind now showed weeks rather than months. I needed to accelerate my preparations without raising suspicion. I started with items stored in the basement and garage. Winter clothes, books, mementos from before our marriage. Each morning I would take one small box to my car under the guise of donating old items to charity. These boxes actually went to a small storage unit I had rented near my new apartment. My coworker from the hiking group, now a trusted friend, offered his garage as temporary storage for larger items. One Saturday, while she attended a day-long work conference, he helped me move my desk, a comfortable chair, and several boxes of essential belongings. We worked efficiently, leaving no trace of the removal. The logistics of leaving required meticulous planning. I created a checklist of accounts that needed to be separated or closed: joint credit cards, streaming services, insurance policies. I set up mail forwarding to a P.O. box rather than my new address, concerned she might track me down. I changed all my passwords and security questions, realizing how many of them contained information she knew. One crucial task remained: securing my position at work. During a private meeting with my boss, I explained that I was going through a difficult domestic situation and would soon be changing my address and phone number. I didn't share all the details, but mentioned that my soon-to-be ex might attempt to contact the office with false emergencies or allegations. He listened without judgment and assured me of the company's support, even offering flexible hours during the transition if needed. "You've been a valuable employee for years," he said. "Your personal life is your business, but if you need help, just ask." His simple acknowledgement of my worth as a professional hit me hard. For so long, I had internalized her assessment of me as incompetent and worthless. Here was concrete evidence to the contrary from someone with no reason to lie. At home, her behavior grew increasingly erratic as my departure date approached. Though she remained unaware of my plans, she began checking my phone when I was in the shower, questioning why certain numbers appeared in my call history. The hiking group friend listed in my contacts under a work project code name became the focus of her suspicion. "Who keeps calling you from this number?" she demanded one evening, holding my phone up accusingly. "It's for the Hamilton project," I replied, using the fictional work assignment I had created for just such questions. "We're coordinating deliverables." She clearly didn't believe me, but had no concrete evidence of deception. Her lack of certain knowledge seemed to frustrate her more than confirmation would have. She began checking the mileage on my car, making note of exact numbers before and after work days. I countered by taking different routes, sometimes driving extra miles to maintain consistent readings. 2 weeks before my planned exit, she escalated dramatically. While I was in the shower, she went through my wallet and found the key to my P.O. box. At dinner that evening, she placed it on the table between us. "What's this for?" she asked, voice deceptively calm. The moment called for a decision. I could invent an explanation, or I could begin the separation process now. Looking at the key sitting on our dining table, the physical embodiment of my secret preparations, I chose truth. "It's a P.O. box key," I said simply. "And why do you have a P.O. box I don't know about?" Her tone remained measured, but her fingers gripped her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. "Because I needed one." "You're planning to leave me?" It wasn't a question. "Yes." The admission hung in the air between us. For 15 years I had avoided direct confrontation, adjusting myself to fit her expectations, apologizing for imagined offenses. Now I had confirmed her greatest fear, that her control was slipping away. What followed was not the explosion I expected. Instead, her face crumpled as tears began streaming down her cheeks. For a moment, I almost believed the emotion was genuine. Then I noticed how quickly she recovered when I didn't immediately respond with comfort or recantation of my plans. "After everything I've done for you," she said, voice trembling perfectly. "I've stood by you through your depression, your health problems, your failures. No one will ever care for you like I have." In the past, these words would have triggered overwhelming guilt. Now I recognized them for what they were, more manipulation. I remained silent, watching as she cycled through tactics. When tears didn't work, she shifted to anger, then to bargaining, offering therapy, promising changes. When these met with continued silence, she made a final desperate attempt. "You'll come crawling back within a month," she hissed, mask of vulnerability completely gone. "You can't function without me, and you know it. Who else would want you? Who else would put up with all your problems?" I stood up from the table, taking the P.O. box key with me. "I guess we'll find out," I replied, heading upstairs to the guest bedroom where I had been sleeping for the past week. Behind me, I heard something shatter against the wall. That night, as I lay in bed listening to her sobs through the wall, sobs that grew suspiciously louder whenever I moved around the room, I realized my timeline needed acceleration. The confrontation had forced my hand. Tomorrow would be the day I finally walked away from 15 years of emotional imprisonment. As I made this decision, I felt fear, yes, but also an overwhelming sense of relief. The countdown clock in my head finally reached 0. Morning arrived after a night of little sleep. I rose before dawn, quietly packing the last few essential items into a duffel bag I had hidden in the guest closet. My plan was simple but effective: leave while she was at work, avoiding a potentially dangerous confrontation. However, when I emerged from the guest room, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, still wearing yesterday's clothes, eyes red from crying or lack of sleep. "Going somewhere?" she asked, voice eerily calm as she gestured toward my packed bag. The rehearsed speech I had prepared vanished from my mind. For a moment, we simply stared at each other across the kitchen, the battleground where countless verbal assaults had occurred over 15 years. I set my bag down slowly, maintaining eye contact. "Yes," I replied. "I'm leaving." "Just like that? After 15 years, you're walking out without even trying to fix things?" "We've had 15 years to fix things," I said. "Things have only gotten worse." She stood suddenly, chair scraping against the tile floor. "What about everything I've done for you? I took care of you when you couldn't even get out of bed. I paid the bills when your depression made you useless. I stayed when anyone else would have left." Each statement was designed to trigger my guilt, to remind me of my perceived debt to her. In the past, it would have worked. I would have apologized, begged forgiveness, promised to do better. Not today. "You didn't take care of me," I said quietly. "You used my illness to control me. There's a difference." Her face contorted with rage. "So that's what your therapist has been telling you? That I'm some kind of monster? What about all the times I had to explain to people why my husband was too pathetic to attend social functions? What about the vacations I took alone because you couldn't handle leaving the house? What about the career opportunities I turned down to stay here with you?" Each accusation was carefully crafted, presenting her as the long-suffering martyr and me as the burden. I recognized the tactic now for what it was: a desperate attempt to rewrite our history, to make me question my perception of reality. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said, picking up my bag again. "I've arranged for movers to collect the rest of my things next week. I'll text you the details." As I moved toward the door, she shifted tactics with breathtaking speed. Suddenly she was sobbing, collapsing into a chair. "Please don't do this," she begged, voice cracking with apparent emotion. "I know I've made mistakes. We can get counseling. I'll change. Whatever you want, just don't leave." 6 months ago, this performance would have paralyzed me with guilt and confusion. Now I simply waited by the door, watching as she cycled through emotions with practiced precision. When the tears didn't work, anger returned. "You ungrateful bastard," she hissed, rising from the chair. "You think you can just walk away? You'll be back. You can't function without me and you know it. Who's going to remind you to take your medication? Who's going to deal with your moods? Who's going to want you?" I opened the door, pausing briefly to look back at the woman I had once loved, the woman who had systematically dismantled my self-worth piece by piece over 15 years. "Goodbye," I said simply, stepping outside and closing the door behind me. Her screams followed me down the driveway, becoming muffled as I got into my car. I expected to feel guilt, grief, or even fear as I pulled away from the house we had shared. Instead, an overwhelming sense of peace washed over me. For the first time in 15 years, I was breathing freely. The drive to my new apartment took exactly 1 hour. Traffic flowed smoothly, as if the universe was clearing my path toward freedom. I thought about the possessions I had left behind: furniture, electronics, clothes, and realized none of it mattered. Those things had never truly been mine anyway. They had been tools of control, items she could threaten to take away when I didn't behave as expected. My new apartment was modest but clean, located in a secure building with keycard access. The landlord met me in the lobby, handing over the keys with a friendly smile that expected nothing in return. The furnished unit contained only the basics: a bed, a couch, a small dining table, but it was mine. No one would scrutinize my movements here. No one would monitor my conversations or question my choices. As I unpacked my few belongings, my phone exploded with notifications. Dozens of missed calls and messages alternating between vicious accusations and desperate pleas for reconciliation. I silenced the device and continued organizing my new space. Tomorrow I would change my number. Today was about establishing boundaries. By evening, I had created a functional living space. My clothes hung neatly in the closet. My medication was arranged in the bathroom cabinet. My laptop sat on the small desk by the window. The simplicity was refreshing after years of living in a house filled with expensive items that served primarily as evidence of her success and my dependence. As night fell, I ordered takeout from a nearby restaurant, eating at my new table while watching the city lights come alive outside my window. No one commented on my food choices or criticized my table manners. No one used my enjoyment of the meal as ammunition for later arguments. The silence was not heavy with tension, but light with possibility. When my phone finally died from the constant notifications, I felt no urge to charge it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, legal matters, division of assets, inevitable confrontations. But tonight was mine alone. I stood at the window of my modest apartment, 15 floors above the city, and realized something profound. She had been wrong all along. I didn't have nobody else. I had myself, stronger and more resilient than she had ever given me credit for. And as it turned out, that was enough to start with. What she didn't understand, what she could never understand, was that her constant reminder that I had nobody else had ultimately given me the greatest gift possible, the realization that being alone was infinitely better than being with someone who systematically destroyed my soul. As I prepared for my first night of true freedom, I wondered how long it would take her to realize that in trying to convince me I had nobody else, she had never considered the possibility that one day she would be the one with nobody. 6 months have passed since I walked out of that house and that marriage. 6 months of rebuilding, healing, and discovering who I am, without the constant soundtrack of criticism and belittlement. The transformation has been remarkable even to me. My therapist says I'm like a different person, more confident, more authentic, more alive. The chronic pain in my back has diminished to occasional discomfort. The depression that once kept me bedridden now manifests as rare melancholy that passes quickly. The legal separation was finalized 3 months ago. I let her keep most of our possessions, asking only for my personal items and a fair division of our financial assets. My lawyer thought I was being too generous, but I explained that freedom was worth more than furniture or electronics. Each item in that house carried memories of control and manipulation. I wanted nothing that would anchor me to that past. Word reached me through mutual acquaintances about how she was handling the separation. The reports confirmed what I had suspected would happen. Without me to control and manipulate, her carefully constructed world began unraveling. The friends who had tolerated her because of their loyalty to me stopped accepting her invitations. CO workers who had endured her condescension no longer felt obligated to include her in after-work gatherings. The most revealing information came from her cousin, who contacted me out of concern. Apparently she had been calling family members daily, cycling between vicious character assassinations of me and tearful pleas for them to help convince me to return. When sympathy waned, she began inventing medical emergencies to regain attention. The family eventually recognized the pattern and began distancing themselves as well. Her workplace performance suffered too. Without me as her emotional punching bag, she began directing her controlling behavior toward colleagues. According to her cousin, she received a formal warning from HR about her treatment of subordinates. The professional facade she had maintained for years was crumbling without the release valve our marriage had provided. Some might expect me to feel vindication or satisfaction at these reports. Instead, I feel a complex mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the broken person she reveals herself to be, and relief that I am no longer responsible for managing her emotional storms. The irony isn't lost on me. After 15 years of telling me I had nobody else, she now finds herself increasingly isolated by her own behavior. My own life has expanded in ways I never imagined possible. The hiking group that provided my first taste of freedom has become a circle of genuine friends. We meet regularly, not just for outdoor adventures, but for dinners, movies, and simple companionship. These relationships require no emotional price tag, no constant reassurance, no walking on eggshells. They are balanced exchanges between equals, something I had forgotten was possible. My career has flourished as well. Free from the constant undermining at home, my confidence at work has grown. 3 months after leaving, I received a promotion that had seemed impossible when I was married. My boss cited my renewed focus and initiative as the deciding factors. The increase in salary allowed me to move to a larger apartment with a view of the city park. Dating remains a distant consideration. My therapist suggests giving myself at least a year to fully recover before pursuing romantic relationships. For now, I'm enjoying the discovery of my own preferences and boundaries. Simple pleasures, watching documentaries instead of the reality shows she preferred, cooking spicy food she would have rejected, sleeping with the window open, have become acts of reclamation. Last week, I ran into one of her friends at a grocery store. The encounter could have been awkward, but instead became unexpectedly illuminating. After initial pleasantries, she confessed that several in their social circle had recognized the emotional abuse in our marriage, but felt powerless to intervene. She always made it seem like you'd fall apart without her, the friend explained. We could see what was happening, but she convinced everyone that confronting her would hurt you more. The revelation stung. How different might my life have been if someone had named the abuse years earlier? But regret serves no purpose now. My focus remains firmly on the present and future. Yesterday marked a significant milestone. While cleaning my apartment, I found an old photo that had slipped behind my dresser during the move. It showed us in the early days of our relationship, before the control mechanisms fully engaged. For the first time, I could look at her face without feeling fear, anger, or longing. The photo represented nothing more than a chapter closed, a lesson learned. The most profound change, however, has been internal. The voice in my head that constantly criticized and questioned my worth, the voice that sounded suspiciously like hers, has gradually quieted. In its place has emerged a voice of reason and self-compassion, not ego or inflated self-esteem, but a grounded recognition of my inherent value as a human being. 2 days ago, I received a letter forwarded through my lawyer. Her handwriting was instantly recognizable, as was the emotional manipulation evident in every line. She wrote of regret, of lessons learned, of changes made. She asked for another chance, promising therapy and growth. At the letter's conclusion, she played her final card. No one will ever understand you like I do. No one will ever love you despite your flaws like I have. Years ago, these words would have pulled me back into her orbit. Today they only confirmed how right I had been to leave. True love doesn't position itself as a consolation prize. It doesn't frame acceptance as a sacrifice. It doesn't require the diminishment of one person to elevate the other. I didn't respond to the letter. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I met my friends for dinner, laughing genuinely at their jokes, contributing to conversations without fear of judgment, existing fully in a present she had no power to touch. Throughout the evening, I realized the beautiful truth that had emerged from 15 years of emotional captivity. She had been wrong all along. I didn't have nobody else. I had myself. And as it turned out, that was the foundation upon which a full and meaningful life could be built. The cruel irony of our story's conclusion isn't lost on me. The woman who spent 15 years convincing me I had nobody else now finds herself truly alone, isolated by the very behaviors she used to control me. Meanwhile, the man she dismissed as worthless and dependent has created a life rich with genuine connections, professional success, and inner peace. Sometimes, justice arrives not through confrontation or revenge, but through the natural consequences of one's actions. Her constant reminder that I had nobody else became a self-fulfilling prophecy, not for me, but for her. As I close this chapter of my life and open new ones, I carry forward not bitterness, but gratitude for the painful lessons that ultimately led me to freedom. Our story has come to an end,